over the past year, we have been constantly preached to about equality, racial equality, gender equality, empowerment, you know, all of those virtue signal terms that really have absolutely no meaning when you drill down into it. The reason they have no meaning is because equality is a myth. Just because we were all created equal doesn't mean that we are all equal when we grow up. When we're born, we all have the same opportunities. It's up to the individual to decide what they want to do. If you want true equality, go live in a socialist country where everyone is equally poor except the top 1% of the population who keep all the money for themselves, and most of the time, they're political figures. America is a capitalist country. You can't have true equality in a capitalist economy. It doesn't exist. There's always going to be the haves and the have-nots and the middle class. It has been that way since the beginning of time. You have rich people, you have the middle class, and you have poor people. Throughout the month of March, all we have heard about is equality when it pertains to sports. I really thought that we had turned the corner in getting woke politics out of sports, but here we are again with the wokers trying to push their fantasy agenda on all of us. The reason this equality garbage has been pushed to the forefront this month is because the NCAA released their budget figures for March Madness, the budget for the men's tournament and the budget for the women's tournament. Now, the budget for the men's tournament is double the budget for the women's. Why? Well, when you think about this logically, it makes perfect sense. I went and found the revenue figures for the 2019 tournament for both the men and the women. The men's tournament that year brought in damn near $1 billion in revenue. The women, $15 million. Naturally, the budget for the men is going to be bigger than the women's. They bring in more money in one day than the women do for their entire tournament. But when you're dealing with wokers, logic goes right out the window. It's never about logic with these people. It's never about what makes sense. It's about a political agenda. I love women. I have nothing against women, but let me give you some hard truth. Most people in this country don't give a damn about women's sports. They just don't. If they did, it would show in the television ratings. It would show in the attendance figures, the revenue numbers. At the college level, the money made from football and men's basketball pays for women's sports. It pays for the rest of the athletic programs in the universities. The majority of sports programs for women are money losers. There's a war right now in this country against men. And I'm talking about all men. This is not a racial thing. There is a war on all men in this country. Somehow this narrative that men are holding back women and have been for centuries has permeated throughout our society. Now, have women been treated poorly in this country in the past? Of course they have. I'm not denying that. But we can't do anything about what happened 50, 100 years ago. The truth is, if you took out the men in college sports, there would be no athletic programs for women. One of the women leading this movement when it comes to equality for women athletes is Megan Rapinoe. And I'm not sure if I'm even pronouncing her name right. Really, I don't give a damn. I don't know how to pronounce her name because I've never heard of her until Friday. Megan Rapinoe is a professional soccer player. She's 35 years old, and I mention her age because obviously she has been playing soccer for a while now, well over a decade, I would assume. And her only claim to fame is being a political activist for the woke movement, not for anything that she's accomplished athletically. I'm heading to happy hour Friday evening, and I run across Megan Rapinoe on YouTube. Like I said, I've never heard of her before, but the title of the video caught my attention. So I click on the video mainly to get a good laugh. Megan Rapinoe's whining and complaining that women athletes aren't paid the same as men, that it's not fair. She even went to Congress to lobby for equal pay in sports for men and women. You know, while this is just maddening at times. You can't really get mad because you can't help but laugh at this stuff. The reason women in the WNBA, for example, don't make as much as the dudes in the NBA is simple economics. If I asked you guys to name one player in the WNBA, could you do it? I couldn't do it. I would be willing to bet most of you couldn't either. The reason the average player in the WNBA makes about $100,000 a year and the average NBA player makes $7 million, it's simple to understand the reasoning. The reason WNBA players make less is because no one is watching. The 2020 WNBA Finals last October averaged about 440,000 viewers. More people watch Teen Mom on MTV every week than they watch the WNBA. Fake WWE wrestling draws 3 to 4 times the audience that the WNBA does. And Megan Rapinoe questions why they're not making the salaries that NBA players do? It's simple. The WNBA, they don't have the damn money to pay them. Now, of course, Megan Rapinoe, she shifts the blame. It's not the WNBA or other women's sports' fault that they're not entertaining enough to draw an audience. It's the television network's fault. It's society's fault. The women, they're not given the resources, the branding opportunities. They're not invested in like players in the NFL and the NBA. Let me tell you something about television networks. Every television network is in business to make money. That is their sole purpose. Draw viewers, sell advertising revenue, make money. If the WNBA or women's soccer, tennis, golf, whatever sport you choose, if it drew an audience, the networks would get behind it. They would promote it. They would invest in it. They would build a brand. They don't do that because the majority of people aren't interested. And that's not a slight against women's sports. It's just the reality. Women's sports are a niche product. If it were compelling television, people would watch it. Let me give you an example and show you how this isn't an equality issue, it is an economics issue. 3 of the biggest UFC pay-per-view events of all time, from a buy rate standpoint and a revenue standpoint, were headlined by women. UFC 200, Miesha Tate, Amanda Nunes. UFC 193, Ronda Rousey, Holly Holm. UFC 207, Amanda Nunes and Ronda Rousey. Why is that? Why are those 3 in the top 10 all-time in UFC pay-per-view events? Because it was compelling television. There were interesting stories around all 3 of those fights, and they were all involving the women. People were willing to pay money to see them compete. And all of those women were paid big money for those fights. That alone disproves Megan Rapinoe's entire argument that women aren't paid equally to men in sports. They are paid equally when they draw an audience and draw money. If they don't draw an audience, they don't make as much money. Same goes for men's sports. A professional darts player doesn't make the same money as a quarterback in the NFL or a superstar in the NBA. Average player salaries in Major League Soccer is in the mid 6 figures. Why? Because Americans don't watch soccer. Like I said, this has nothing to do with society having an agenda against women. It is just simple economics. Another issue that Megan Rapinoe is pushing is mixing men and women in sports. She says that transgender men should be allowed to play women's sports and vice versa. Now, that is a recipe for disaster. You know what would happen if men played women's sports? Women's sports would cease to exist because the men would dominate it. Then Megan Rapinoe would be complaining that there's no equality in sports because the competitive balance between the men and the women isn't fair. I don't think I've ever defended Draymond Green. Most of the time I'm criticizing him, but he was on Twitter the other day and he was actually bringing awareness to the pay gap in sports between men and women. He said too much for me to read it all right here, right now, but I didn't think that Draymond Green was being confrontational about it. He was just speaking facts. He posed the question about who is building up the platform in women's sports. Who's telling the world how great some of these women athletes are? And some of them, a lot of them, are really great. It's a fair question. But Megan Rapinoe comes out and she kind of puts Draymond Green on blast. She basically says that it's the responsibility of everyone else to build up the platform for women's sports. That's not how it works. No one is going to build something for you. I have a very small platform here on YouTube. It's growing, but it's small. If I had waited around for someone else to build this platform for me, I would still be waiting around. If Megan Rapinoe wants a bigger platform for women's sports, then she needs to build that platform. Draymond Green, he's not going to build it for her. He already has a platform. ESPN's not going to build it for her. CBS, Fox, ABC, they're not going to build a platform. If you want a bigger platform, make women's sports more compelling, more entertaining. Grow your audience. If that happens, salaries will increase. That's how you go about getting equal pay. Lobbying the government is not the way to do it. Because once the government gets involved, it's bad for everybody. Oh, there would be equal pay. Everyone would be equally making less money. I am past the point of frustration with these wokers spreading their disease in sports. These political issues and agendas, they don't have any place in sports. Megan Rapinoe is going about this the wrong way. Look at what happened last summer with the NBA. They preached for months about racial equality, and everybody tuned them out. Ratings for the playoffs, NBA finals, record lows. With the entire country sitting in quarantine at home, still, no one was watching the NBA. All Megan Rapinoe is doing right now is alienating half of the audience who watch women's sports, which is something that they really can't afford because the audience is so small already. Anyway, I've bloviated long enough about this. What do you guys think of this pay gap in sports? Should women athletes be paid the same as men, even though they don't bring anywhere close to the same revenue or the same audience numbers? Sound off in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe. Click the notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys next time.